I watched my sister's face turn from smug satisfaction to horror as the sprinklers activated, drenching her designer wedding dress in the mud-stained water I'd specially prepared. The prenup she'd forced my father to sign on his deathbed was now dissolving in her hands, the ink running like her expensive mascara. "You didn't think I'd let you get away with stealing my inheritance, did you, dear sister?" I smiled, holding up the real document. Sometimes revenge is best served wet. My name is Avalon Rose Blackwood, and I'm a 29-year-old interior designer from Newport Beach, California. 6 months ago, my father passed away, leaving behind a $3 million beachfront property that had been in our family for generations. I always thought I'd inherit at least half of it. After all, I was the one who stayed by his side through his illness, while my sister gallivanted around Europe with her gold-digger fiancé. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. The day of the will reading still plays in my mind like a horror movie. I sat there in the lawyer's office, my hands trembling as Mr. Patterson, our family attorney for 20 years, cleared his throat and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. My sister, Madeline, sat across from me, wearing that irritating Chanel suit she'd bought with Daddy's credit card just a week before he died. The entire Newport Beach property, including all furnishings and associated assets valued at approximately $3 million, is hereby bequeathed to Madeline Ann Blackwood. The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. The room started spinning and I heard a strange, hollow laugh. It took me a moment to realize it was coming from my own throat. 29 years of being the good daughter, of sacrificing my own dreams to help run Dad's real estate business while putting my interior design career on hold, of being there through every chemotherapy session, every sleepless night, every moment of pain. All of it meant nothing. But what made it even worse was what I discovered later that day. As I was leaving the lawyer's office, still in a daze, I overheard a conversation between Madeline and her fiancé, Marcus, in the parking lot. They were celebrating, champagne already in hand, when I heard the words that changed everything. "I told you the plan would work, baby," Marcus was saying, his arms around my sister's waist. "Your father was so out of it on those pain meds, he would have signed anything. And that revised will we had Patterson create, perfect timing, right before the old man kicked the bucket." I froze behind the pillar, my heart pounding. They had manipulated our dying father. They had taken advantage of his medication-induced confusion to change his will. The property, my inheritance, had been stolen from me through the cruelest form of deception. That night, as I sat in my small rented apartment, because unlike my sister, I'd refused to take Daddy's money for a down payment on a house, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I'm not normally a vindictive person, but something inside me snapped. I started planning, methodically and carefully, like a chess player setting up the perfect game. First, I needed proof of their deception. I began by befriending Patterson's new legal assistant, a young man named Jake, who had no loyalty to the firm's old guards. Over coffee dates and subtle flirtation, I learned that there was indeed something fishy about the timing of the will's modification. But I needed more than just suspicions. That's when I remembered something crucial: Daddy's old diary. He'd kept one for years, meticulously documenting everything, including his medication schedule and visitors. I knew Madeline would have cleared out most of his personal belongings from the beach house, but there was one place she didn't know about: a hidden wall safe behind his favorite Monet reproduction in his study. Getting into the house wasn't easy. Madeline had already changed the locks, but she'd forgotten one critical detail. I was the one who had installed the smart home system last year, and I still had administrative access to the security controls. One careful hack later, and I was in. The diary was exactly where I expected, and what I found inside made my blood boil. Dad had clearly documented his wishes for an equal split of the property between his daughters. More importantly, he had noted his increasing concerns about Madeline's fiancé and his suspicious interest in the family's assets. There were even moments of clarity where he questioned whether he had signed something he shouldn't have. But the real breakthrough came when I discovered a USB drive tucked into the diary's back pocket. With trembling hands, I plugged it into my laptop, and there it was, a video recording Dad had made just 3 months before his death, when his mind was still sharp. In it, he clearly stated his intentions for the property division and expressed his worries about being pressured to change his will. Now I had ammunition, but I needed perfect timing. Madeline and Marcus had announced their wedding would be held at the beach house, Daddy's house, in just 2 months. They wanted to show off their new property to their high society friends, make it their first big splash as Newport Beach's newest power couple. Little did they know, I was about to turn their perfect wedding day into something very, very different. But first, I needed to put a few more pieces into place. I had the evidence, but evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed leverage, something that would force them to not just admit their deception, but to face real consequences. That's when I discovered Marcus's other fiancé in San Diego. Marcus's other fiancée turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Her name was Valentina Reyes, a successful real estate agent who'd been engaged to Marcus for 8 months, overlapping entirely with his engagement to my sister. When I found her Instagram profile and saw her proudly showing off the same unique vintage engagement ring Marcus had given Madeline, claiming it was his grandmother's, I knew I'd struck gold. But I didn't approach Valentina immediately. First, I needed to understand exactly what kind of man we were dealing with. A deep dive into Marcus's background revealed a pattern. He had a history of targeting wealthy women, becoming engaged, and then disappearing with substantial loans or business investments right before the wedding. He'd changed his name twice and had outstanding warrants in Florida and Arizona. My sister, blinded by his charm and good looks, had fallen for the oldest con in the book. I reached out to Valentina through a fake account, presenting myself as another one of Marcus's victims. Over drinks at a quiet bar in San Diego, we shared our stories. She was smarter than my sister. She'd done her research too, but hadn't been able to locate his other current fiancé. When I finally revealed who I was, instead of being angry, she smiled, a slow, calculating smile that matched my own. "I think," she said, swirling her martini, "we can help each other." The plan we crafted was beautiful in its simplicity. Valentina would continue playing the role of the unsuspecting fiancé, while I worked on gathering more evidence of Marcus and Madeline's manipulation of my father's will. But we needed one more person on our side, someone from the law firm itself. Remember Jake, Patterson's legal assistant? He'd been becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the firm's ethical violations. After a particularly intense late-night conversation, and yes, maybe a few too many glasses of wine, he agreed to help us. He had access to the firm's digital records and security cameras. More importantly, he had witnessed Patterson and Marcus having several suspicious meetings before my father's will was changed. The pieces were falling into place, but we had to move carefully. One wrong step and Madeline would suspect something. I maintained my defeated bitter sister act, even attending her extravagant bridal shower with a forced smile and an expensive gift. I watched her flaunt her new status as the beach house's owner, rearranging our family's generations-old furniture and planning to sell our mother's antique collection. "You should come see what I'm doing with Daddy's study," she told me one day, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm turning it into a yoga room. You know how Daddy always said we should practice more self-care." I wanted to scream. That study was where our father had taught us to read, where he'd helped us with our homework, where he'd shared stories of our mother after she passed. Instead, I smiled and said, "That's wonderful, Maddie. You always did know how to make things your own." Meanwhile, Jake was documenting everything. He discovered that Patterson had backdated several documents related to the will's modification. He also found evidence that Marcus had paid Patterson a substantial consulting fee through an offshore account. It was all highly illegal and exactly what we needed. But the real masterstroke came from Valentina. She discovered that Marcus had already put down deposits on a luxury condo in Dubai, in his name only. He was planning to take the money from the beach house's sale and disappear right after the wedding, leaving my sister with nothing but debt and broken dreams. 3 weeks before the wedding, we set up a meeting with a federal investigator who specialized in estate fraud. Agent Sarah Chen was particularly interested in Patterson's involvement, as she'd been building a case against him for similar incidents with other clients. We handed over our evidence, but with one condition: they couldn't move on it until the wedding day. "Why wait?" Agent Chen asked, reviewing the damning documents. I smiled, thinking of the sprinkler system I'd already modified, the waterproof cameras I'd installed around the property's garden where the ceremony would take place, and the real copy of my father's original will that Jake had managed to recover from Patterson's personal safe. "Because," I explained, "sometimes justice needs an audience. And my sister's wedding will have over 200 guests, including every major player in Newport Beach's social scene." But I didn't tell Agent Chen everything. She knew about the fraud, about Marcus's history, about Patterson's crimes. What she didn't know was that I had one more card to play, something I discovered in my father's diary that would change everything. You see, the beach house wasn't just valuable because of its location or size. Hidden in that diary was information about something else my father had left behind, something worth far more than $3 million, something that Madeline, Marcus, and Patterson had no idea existed. The secret Dad had kept hidden all these years was almost too incredible to believe. Behind a false wall in his study safe, I found a folder containing documents about a lucrative oil deposit discovered on our property 15 years ago. He'd kept it quiet, waiting for the right moment to develop it. The geological surveys estimated its value at over $50 million. The irony? The deposit was specifically located under the guest house, the only part of the property that was still legally in my name. Dad had gifted it to me on my 25th birthday, and in their rush to steal everything, Madeline and Marcus had overlooked this small but crucial detail. As the wedding day approached, my plan crystallized. Valentina would arrive during the ceremony's climactic moment, playing her part as the scorned fiancé. Agent Chen and her team would be positioned among the guests, ready to move. And I had the most important role of all. The morning of the wedding was perfect, sunny with the light breeze carrying the salt air from the ocean. I watched from my old bedroom window as the vendors transformed our garden into a wedding venue. Madeline had spared no expense, with imported flowers, crystal champagne flutes, and a string quartet. The guests started arriving at noon, Newport Beach's elite, in their finest attire. I dressed carefully in a pale blue gown, playing my part as the supportive sister. When I entered Madeline's bridal suite, she was preening in front of the mirror, admiring herself in our mother's restored vintage wedding dress, another family treasure she'd claimed as her own. "Oh, Avalon," she said, barely glancing at me. "Be a dear and make sure the prenup is ready for signing before the ceremony. Marcus is so traditional about these things." I smiled, thinking of the modified sprinkler system and the waterproof cameras. "Don't worry, sister dear. Everything will be exactly as it should be." The ceremony began at 2 p.m. sharp. I sat in the front row, watching Marcus swagger down the aisle, completely unaware that his Dubai dreams were about to crumble. Madeline followed, radiant in her stolen dress, clutching a bouquet of white roses. Just as the minister asked if anyone had any objections, I pressed a button on my phone. The sprinklers came to life, but instead of water, they sprayed a special mixture I'd prepared, one that would react with the invisible ink I'd used to make copies of all the incriminating documents. As chaos erupted, Valentina made her entrance, wedding photos in hand. Agent Chen's team moved in, and I stood up, pulled out the original will, and faced the crowd of shocked, drenched guests. But what happened next surprised even me. What I didn't expect was Marcus's reaction. Instead of trying to flee or make excuses, he started laughing. A cold, calculated laugh that sent chills down my spine. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a document of his own. "Oh, dear Avalon," he sneered. "Did you really think you were the only one who knew about the oil? Why do you think I chose this family in the first place?" The crowd gasped as Marcus revealed his own set of geological surveys. He'd been working with an oil company all along, planning to sell the development rights immediately after the wedding. But his revelation had just played right into my hands. "Actually, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying across the stunned audience, "I was counting on that." I nodded to someone in the crowd, my own oil company representative, who stood up holding a signed contract. "You see, while you were busy planning to sell the rights to the oil under the main property, I've already sold the rights to the deposit under the guest house, which I own outright." Madeline's face went pale. "The guest house? What are you talking about?" That's when Jake stepped forward, holding up a property deed. "Your father gifted the guest house to Avalon 4 years ago," he announced. "It's been in her name ever since. And as it happens, the most valuable oil deposit lies directly beneath it." The next few minutes were chaos. Agent Chen moved in with her team, arresting Marcus for multiple counts of fraud and outstanding warrants. Patterson, who had been trying to slip away during the commotion, was cornered by federal agents. Valentina stepped forward and presented evidence of Marcus's multiple engagements and financial scams. But the most dramatic moment came when Madeline, her wedding dress soaked and muddy, finally broke down. "I never wanted any of this," she sobbed. "Marcus convinced me Dad was playing favorites, that you were manipulating him during his illness. He said if we didn't act, you'd take everything." Looking at my sister then, I saw not the confident socialite she pretended to be, but the insecure little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. That's when I revealed my final surprise. "The oil rights I sold," I said softly. "I made sure the contract included a 50-50 split of all proceeds between both daughters of Richard Blackwood. That's what Dad would have wanted." The resolution came swiftly after that. Marcus and Patterson faced criminal charges. The original will was reinstated, splitting the beach house property equally between Madeline and me. The oil company began preliminary work, with both of us as equal partners in what would become a $50 million venture. Madeline and I had a lot of healing to do, but we started with a simple act. Together, we restored Dad's study to exactly how it had been, Monet reproduction and all. The yoga room would have to go somewhere else. As for me, I finally opened my own interior design firm, using my share of the oil proceeds as a startup capital. My first client, Valentina, who decided to stay in Newport Beach and bought a penthouse that needed a complete renovation. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about restoring what was meant to be all along. Dad would have been proud of that. The beach house still stands proudly on Newport's coastline, but now it tells a different story. It's not just a $3 million property anymore. It's a testament to justice served, sisters reconciled, and a father's wisdom finally understood. Madeline and I have Sunday dinners there every week, in the dining room where we used to sit with Dad. planning our futures and sharing our dreams. In that hidden wall safe behind the Monet, we decided to leave it exactly where it is. A reminder that sometimes the most valuable things in life aren't the ones you can see at first glance.